Welcome, everybody. My name's Tracy Beck, and I'm the Executive Director of the American Swedish Historical Museum. I'm excited to introduce you to Joe Matthews today. Joe came to New Sweden colony history after he was able to retire from gainful employment in 2012. He joined the Cumberland County Historical Society in Greenwich, New Jersey. And the project he was working on for them was really interesting. They were getting dendrochronological research done of the Swedish granary building that is part of the Historical Society. So Joe worked on that project, and as he got involved, he got more and more interested in log buildings and in the New Sweden colony. Later, he learned that the Bridgeton, New Sweden Colonial Farmstead needed to move from Bridgeton, New Jersey and find a new home, and he got involved in that project too. The Bridgeton Colonial Farmstead was actually erected in Bridgeton, New Jersey in 1988 for the 350th anniversary of the New Sweden colony. It was a remarkable place where people could experience living history of the New Sweden colony era. I know that Joe is going to tell you a lot more about how that got started and what has happened to these wonderful buildings since then, so I'm going to turn it over to him. Joe?
Thank you, Tracy. Today I would like to describe in words and photographs the ambitious project that has transported the 7 log buildings that made up the New Sweden Colonial Farmstead Museum that originally stood in a section of Bridgeton City Park in New Jersey to a new home in Governor Printz Park in Essington, part of Tinicum Township, Pennsylvania, just south of Philadelphia International Airport on the Delaware River. As many of you already know, the New Sweden Colonial Farmstead Museum, or more simply for the purposes of this talk, the Farmstead, was first built in 1987-88 by the New Jersey nonprofit, the New Sweden Company, not only to commemorate the 350th anniversary of the first permanent European settlement in the Delaware Valley by the Swedish nation, but also to educate the public about the New Sweden colony, its culture and physical environment. Each of the buildings of the farmstead was based on historical research conducted by the Swedish architectural preservationist and builder Gunnar Zetterquist and his associate Severin Johansson. There was also a mason, Åke Frank. The buildings were arranged in a rectangle to form a courtyard and fenced in to control livestock. Each building had a different purpose and was built over months and years in an order dictated by circumstances obtaining in the wilderness. Simple shelter first, while the land was cleared and the livestock and harvest was protected, and a larger dwelling later on as the family grew and conditions improved. Other buildings included a granary, a stable with a hayloft, a livestock barn, a threshing barn with a storage loft, and a forge or smithy, which was shared with other families nearby. The grand opening of the farmstead took place on April 14, 1988, and was attended by state dignitaries like New Jersey Governor Thomas Kane, and more spectacularly by the Swedish King Karl XVI Gustav and Queen Sylvia, who were greeted by members of the Nanticoke Lenni Lenape tribe headquartered in Bridgeton. Thousands were in attendance. It is still remembered by many as a great day for the city. And I'd like to show some photographs of the farmstead. Here's a few just of the whole farmstead. That building is the forge. It had a sod roof. Another shot. There's the king with the queen behind him cutting the ribbon, and there's Governor Tom Kane, second from left. and other folks involved in the project. There's the Queen being greeted by the Lenape. There's the Queen with Gunnar Zetterquist, the builder. There's another shot of Mr. Zetterquist. I was in Sweden last fall, and I had an Airbnb host to whom I showed this photograph, and he immediately said, "Ah, that's someone from Dalarna." Excuse me. We immediately recognized that he was from Dalarna, something about the costume. There's another shot of Mr. Zetterquist as the building was being built. There's the smokehouse, and note the overlap of the roof. We'll talk about that later. This is the interior of the smokehouse, and this is a recent shot when it was just before it was dismantled. That's a baby vulture that a mother had 2 baby vultures in this building. There's an opening in the roof that allowed it to come in. We had to wait for the vultures to fledge before we could continue with the dismantling. There's the largest building, the main residence. And note the roof. That's a roof typical of the province of Dalarna, I do believe. I visited Skansen, and there's a Mara Mara Farmstead at Skansen that has many roofs like this. There's the interior of the main residence. We haven't built the fireplace yet, but we intend to as long as our money holds out. There's another shot of the fireplace. That's the forge with the sod roof. That's the interior of the forge with the fireplace in the forge. And to the left, you can't see it, is a large bellows. The farmstead was operated for years as a living history museum by the New Sweden Company with many volunteers and even a small paid staff. I am a relative newcomer to Cumberland County, of which Bridgeton is the county seat. I arrived in the early 1990s and never actually visited the farmstead while it was in operation. Nevertheless, I have some sense of the scale of the operation because I have perused its administrative papers in a collection at the Cumberland County Historical Society Library, where I work part-time. I've also spoken often with eyewitnesses. By the time I became involved with the farmstead and the New Sweden Company around 2013, the farmstead had been closed for years, and the New Sweden Company had decided not to try to restore it in Bridgeton, as had been its intention, but rather to move it to a more central location where more visitors could be attracted to it. The South Jersey Industrial Sand Company, WIBCO, headed by the Swedish-American Wade Sjogren and his family, had contributed $10,000, first intended for the restoration in place, then after reconsideration for the move to a better location. And here's a few photographs of this is the stable. I didn't complete my tour of the Farmstead Museum. This is the stable. It has a loft. There's the interior of the stable. There's the granary, which is elevated off the ground. This is a place where you would store things like seeds or supplies or furs for trade. That's the interior of the granary before dismantling. And that's the interior of the livestock barn just before dismantling. And that's the threshing barn that also has a loft. And note that the roof is pretty deteriorated. You probably can't see it too clearly, but there's a rubber membrane under those half logs that would keep water out. And here's a photograph of some of the deterioration, and again, some deterioration. As newly appointed chairman of the organization, I asked Frank Eld, the Finnish-American log building preservationist from Idaho, to examine the building. Excuse me. He assured me that they were indeed still salvageable despite the deterioration of 25 years. I'll mention parenthetically that others whose opinion I asked were quite skeptical about attempting a renovation, but Frank's thumbs up was enough for me. Frank joined our board and stayed quite involved himself, even offering to lead the restoration, as he once had done in Idaho for a museum there. At that time, we believed we were moving to Wilmington, either to the grounds of the Kalmar-Nickel Foundation or to Fort Christina Park next door. Ultimately, neither site worked out. But in 2015 and 2016, not knowing that yet, we dismantled 3 of the cabins and moved them to the parking lot of the Kalmar-Nickel. Frank had showed us how to label all of the logs by stamping washers with a code referring to a diagram and then screwing them to the logs so they wouldn't get lost. It worked well. This crucial step of labeling enabled the final assembly years later. We used the WIBCO $10,000 to pay the workers, and Peter Boyce, the owner of Delmont Sawmill and of an old but still quite operational logging truck. We had been struggling with the heavy logs for a few days on our own, so it was a revelation to see Peter's boom lifting multiple logs at a time. Here's some photographs of that operation. There's a photograph of the movers, and that's Frank Eld, second from the left. To his left are 3 men that often volunteered at the Kalmar-Nickel. That's Peter Boyce hoisting a logs with his boom. There's his truck. It was an old truck, but it was still serviceable. Only broke down once. And there's a shot of him stacking the logs for storage. You'll note that there's they called them stickers between the layers of logs, and that helped to keep air circulation. There's a washer that was stamped, and that's how the cabins looked from the inside after the washers were screwed on. In late 2016, then Swedish Colonial Society Governor Michael DeAndrea informed us of the opportunity he had learned about from Tinicum Township Commissioner Pat Barr, namely that there was to be an improvement project at the 7-acre Governor Printz Park, the very site of Johann Printz's colonial capital, with the archaeological remnants of the 1643 Prinzhof still in place underground. It is a much-used space for recreation and community events. To the beautiful view over the river would be added landscaping, newly paved walkways, picnic gazebos, a band shell, a splash park, a playground, and shuffleboard and horseshoe courts. Already in place were the impressive statue of Governor Printz and the New Sweden History Walk with signage offering historical information. It seemed that Printz Park could make the farmstead a most fitting home. In fact, the idea had deep roots. The New Sweden historian Amandus Johnson, in a 1938 essay, provides a brief history of the Swedish Colonial Society that he founded, I believe, in 1908. and its role in establishing Governor Printz Park as a memorial of the Prinzhof and the settlement, settlement on Tinicum Island. He describes how he hoped eventually that a replica Prinzhof would be built and the park developed, quote, as a kind of Skansen, unquote, with the, quote, Swedish farm from the 1600s, unquote, made up of various log buildings serving different purposes. Skansen, as many of you know, is the world's first open-air museum, having been opened in Stockholm in 1891, and is comprised of over 150 historic structures from throughout Sweden, the purpose of which is to show pre-industrial and rural ways of life. The folklorist Artur Hazelius was Skansen's founder, as Georg Karlin, I hope the pronunciation is correct, was the founder of Kulturen, Sweden's second open-air museum at Lund in southern Sweden, which opened in 1892. Perhaps it was under the influence of Skansen or Kulturen or Johnson's essay that the New Sweden Company hired Gunnar Zetterquist to design and build the farmstead in the first place. In any case, prompted by Swedish Colonial Society Governor DeAndrea, we came to realize that in all the Delaware Valley, there could be no better home for the farmstead than Governor Printz Park. In May 2017, the Swedish Colonial Society, guided by DeAndrea, pledged $25,000 to reconstruct the largest of the cabins at the park. This is the only cabin with 2 rooms, the so-called main residence. Additional money had been solicited from individuals through a biolog campaign publicized in the Swedish Colonial Society Journal. At $100 a log or $1,000 a wall, that would bring in thousands more. Getting the backing of the Swedish Colonial Society was certainly a game changer to us at the New Sweden Company. Around this time, conversations between the township and our 2 organizations, the Swedish Colonial Society and the New Sweden Company, took place and a deal was struck. The township would prepare the site by building code-required foundations for each of the 7 buildings, if for their part, the New Sweden Company would reconstruct each cabin on site at its own expense and then deed the finished cabins to the township. We all decided it would be best to arrange the cabins around the New Sweden History Walk. The signage, which had seen better days, would be refurbished, and historian Kim Eric Williams would write revisions for each sign along the walk. And here are some photographs of the park. You can see the statue of Prince. There he is from the other side. Some old historical signage at the park, relatively new entrance to the park. And there you can see the foundations with the signage and a new sidewalk and lampposts. The landscaping hasn't been done yet, but these features have been added. Meanwhile, over the winter, Bridgeton City had given us the July 1st, 2017 deadline to have the 4 remaining cabins removed. We had just enough left from the $10,000 to accomplish this. I labeled the logs. A local contractor, you can see them in this photograph, dismantled the cabins, and Peter Boyce of Delmont Sawmill carried the logs to a storage area in Leesburg, New Jersey, eastern Cumberland County, provided for free by Widco. Bridgeton gave us extra time to allow 2 fledgling baby vultures to vacate the cabin with the opening in the roof called the smokehouse. But all of the cabins were out of Bridgeton City Park by the end of 2017. There's the workers, there's their crane, which really helped. And there's the storage area in Leesburg. In the background, the Morris River is visible. This happens to be an area that was settled early on by colonial era Swedes. So to recap, as 2018 starts, with the Swedish Colonial Society's $25,000 pledge, we know we want to build the main residence in Governor Printz Park. The question is, who will do the job? 2018 was largely spent trying to answer this question and another related question, that of insurance. The insurance that we already had was revealed to be inadequate for construction activity. Much time and effort was expended exploring the feasibility of using volunteers headed up by a very willing, not to say impatient, Frank Eld. This unfortunately turned out to be a dead end because of liability issues. Long story short, we needed a general contractor who came with his own insurance and who had experience with log buildings. The name of Eli Stoltzfus and Highline Construction came to us through the good offices of former Swedish Colonial Society Governor Sally Bridwell, who got Eli's name from her carpenter. Highline is an Amish-owned construction business operating out of At Glen, PA, in Lancaster County. The new Swedish Colonial Society Governor John Teep and I went to speak with Eli, who showed interest in our project because of its historical nature. Right off the bat, he had some good ideas about how economically to make our buildings as strong and as safe for visitors, school children among them, as possible. It took some time, but with John Teep's lawyerly advice, we drew up and signed off on a satisfactory three-way agreement between Highline, Tinicum Township, and the New Sweden Company. Highline began work on April 4th, 2019, showing up at the Kalmar-Nickel parking lot where the logs of the main residence were stacked. Somehow the sight of the powerful-looking forklift immediately dispelled the doubts that may have crept in during the delays of 2018. The way the small Highline crew swung into action further impressed. At first, Highline owner Eli Stoltzfus helped set up the workplace, and then Henry Fisher and Josh Foran took over. Other workers would join the group as well, usually numbering no more than 4. Henry was the foreman who made many of the on-site decisions that had to be made on the spot. He consistently proved to have good judgment. Workers seemed to work independently, but teams formed organically as needed. It was a smooth running work site. The main residence was up within a month and looked wonderful inside and out. The grand opening took place on June 1st, 2019, with displays and docents dressed in colonial style meeting waves of visitors. Then on June 30th, we were back again with displays in colonial garb, participating with the township's July 4th celebration. It had started to make sense to us that we should try to coordinate many of our events with those of the township so as to increase the likelihood of higher attendance, one of the benefits of partnering with Tinicum Township. Another important partner was the Tinicum Township Historical Society, headed by President Bill Mahler. There's the 2 Amish on site getting the logs ready to be moved to the park. Henry Fisher on the right. There's Eli Stoltzfus preparing the work site, ordering the logs around the foundations. This is for the first building. And there's, you can see that the building has already started. You can't see it very well, but this building is resting on basically a foundation on a foundation, 8-inch concrete blocks that the lower logs are screwed into. And there's the completed building. Now those concrete blocks that I mentioned, they have been covered over with fieldstone cemented into place, giving the appearance of a stone foundation. The roof consists of 2 layers of wooden plank with 2 layers of ice and water shield in between. There's the interior of the building without any chinking. There's the same interior with chinking. The floor is tongue and groove. It's very sturdy. There's a view from the rear of the building. You can see the signage, the other foundations, and the river. And there's a view from the other side, looking back toward the new building. You can see the 6 foundations and signage, 6 foundations waiting for their buildings. And there's the group photo of the Swedish Colonial Society, June 1st, 2019. There's a view from the river toward the band shell. You can see the people do like congregating there on a sunny day. And here are a couple flyers for township events. This is the July 4th, the fireworks event. And they have a farm market in summer. Oh, there's the new building at night. You can see they have festive lights on their lampposts. There's another shot of that. And this is at our Harvest Festival. I'll get back to that one. The completion of the main residence was certainly a triumph. We were able to start our programming with a Harvest Festival at which we displayed the settler's trunk of the New Sweden Center. We also decorated the cabin for Christmas as part of our annual Julmiddag, or Christmas luncheon. But the idea all along had been to complete the first building to establish the project's credibility and then search for a grant to build the remaining 6 cabins. The cost to rebuild the main residence had exceeded the original $25,000 pledge and even the biolog income. But the Swedish Colonial Society met this challenge. In the end, after chinking was added, around $41,000 had been spent to build the main residence. Some of this was borrowed from the Swedish Colonial Society treasury and was to be reimbursed from any future grant. But where would that grant come from to finish the remaining cabins? Excuse me. We knew we had to mount a fundraising campaign, so Governor John Teep got started by estimating costs for all 6 cabins, basing his estimate on the costs incurred for the main residence. He arrived at the figure of $177,250. He then wrote a prospectus describing the overall project, including many photos and the budget, and sent the application to a funding source he knew of, the Crystal Trust in Wilmington, Delaware. We'd have to wait until Christmas 2019 to hear back. Remember that the cabins had been exposed to outside elements for years: rain, snow, and sun. Alarmingly, some of the logs had sprouted fungi. We could only hope to be rescued by an infusion of cash. And there's the photograph that I wanted to show you of the fungi. It was pretty alarming. So we really knew we had to get this building built. To our astonishment, a check for John's requested amount was in the mailbox by early January. The Crystal Trust had come through. Then, soon enough, a new three-way agreement was negotiated, written, signed, and put into action. By this time, COVID-19 had struck, and Highline had to wait for Pennsylvania's construction ban to be lifted before it could start. But start it did on May 7th, 2020. Because the pandemic had shut down the splash park and other events in the park, Highline could work through the summer, erecting all of the buildings in turn without interruption. This was a great help. Passers-by must have been curious all summer. As of August 13th, all the work on all 6 buildings was done, except for the chinking and the fireplaces. As of the recording of this talk on September 23rd, much of the chinking has been done. Enough money remains from the grant to pay for the chinking, and we hope for both fireplaces. After that, other work remains, of course. The many authentic Swedish artifacts, farm implements, a weaving loom, and so on, that were once used in Bridgeton had to be brought out of storage, refurbished, and returned to the buildings that they were in. Educational programs will need to be devised, cooperation with partners worked out, and so on. But for now, for the time being, to see these buildings rescued from their previous sorry state, restored, structurally strong, safe, and proud-looking is enough for today and is to be celebrated. I extend heartfelt thanks to all the good folks, too numerous to mention here, who helped make the renovation and reconstruction of the farmstead happen. And here are some photographs of the new buildings. Well, this is a photograph of the logs being stacked in Leesburg. This is the forge with the new cedar shake roof. This is interior of the forge. You can see the screws and the gaps between the logs that need to be covered by chinking. Here's the new stable. The smokehouse. Note the overlapping shingles to protect against storm winds. There's the threshing barn. This is the foundation for the threshing barn. I wanted to show you how this secondary foundation, if you want to call it, looked. There's a livestock barn. And some logs had to be replaced with new logs, and here we are choosing replacement logs at Delmont Sawmill in Leesburg. And here's the granary in the foreground and the livestock barn in the background. There's the interior of the granary, actually before dismantling. This is, again, one of the fireplaces, and there's the other fireplace of the forge. To the left is a big bellows. There are the artifacts in storage in Bridgeton. I would like to mention how we handled some of the physical challenges of the renovation. As with any construction project, we were limited in money and time. The logs themselves were of varying viability. Many were still solid, others had rotted areas that needed treatment, others had to be replaced entirely. There were inherent flaws in the original buildings. Notches were facing upward, inviting water damage and causing ends simply to fall off. Given such unpredictability, we paid Highline by the hour. It was important, therefore, that challenges be addressed quickly and definitively. Therefore, rather than try to build upon stone foundations as they had in 1988, to save time to achieve greater stability, Highline anchored the bottom logs onto cement block, which was later covered by field stones cemented into place, thus giving the appearance of stone foundations, as I mentioned before. I visited Skansen in fall 2019 and spoke with their architectural conservator, Staffan Hansing, who asked, and here's a photograph of Staffan, who asked why we use structural screws and chinking. Chinking is unknown in Sweden, and historic log cabins will stand hundreds of years with wooden pegs and simple gravity. I answered that our buildings needed to be safe for visitors, and screws inserted at regular intervals achieve safety quickly, keeping us within our budget. He reluctantly granted me that. But what about chinking? Well, 6 of our 7 original buildings were chinked in 1988 because they had to be built quickly to meet a deadline. No time for hand hewing. Gaps had to be sealed up. In 2020, chinking is still required to cover those parts of the screws visible in the gaps and to keep the interiors of the cabins dry. Remember that molds had invaded the logs, which need to stay as dry as possible. With our project, chinking is necessary finishing work. I was especially interested in roofs at Skansen. There's roofs behind Staffan, and there's another interesting roof. Gunnar Zetterquist's roof design was modeled on wooden roofs made of planks or slabs, typical of the province of Dalarna. I believe that's how you pronounce that. The Mora farmstead at Skansen had several such buildings. There's yet another photograph. To carry out this design, we would have had to use half logs or slabs, which are expensive, or we would have had to use 2 layers of planks with some extra handiwork. Again, being under the constraints of time and money, we chose instead to use cedar shakes, which were much cheaper than slabs, and were also historically accurate, cedar shingles being manufactured in the colony early on. We priced out all of our options. Pine boards are cheapest at $4.50 a square foot, then slabs at $8.50, then cedar shakes at $9, and finally sod, $17, which would also include maintenance. The cost of shakes is mitigated by other savings. Only 1 layer of underlying pine boards is needed, then only 1 layer of ice and water shield, then a layer of cedar breather mat, then the shingles. Cedar shingles last long, are attractive, and no staining is needed. I'll mention just a few more details. We have installed chicken wire to keep children out from under the granary and made removable steps to prevent them from climbing onto its front porch when the farmstead is closed. We have installed fixed windows with glass panes instead of sliding boards to add light to the interior. You have to duck to enter the cabins because low doors were better for defense in the 17th century. The smokehouse was designed to have an opening in its roof to allow smoke from the fire inside to escape. If we want one, we'll add the opening later. You can track the farmstead being built. Bill Mahler, president of the Tinicum Township Historical Society, visited the work site every day to take photos, which he has kindly posted online at the Google Drive link provided in the contents bibliography. There is another partnership to mention briefly. Tinicum Township has offered exhibition space to house the museum collection of the Swedish Colonial Society at the beautifully renovated 19th century Lazaretto quarantine station. The new location should increase visitation for the collection. And here's a photograph of the Lazaretto. This is pre-renovation. The new porch runs along the entire front of the building. In conclusion, I hope I have conveyed that we had our problems, but we learned as we went, as this project unfolded over about 4 years from fall 2015, when the first cabin was dismantled, to the start of construction in the spring of 2020. I'm amazed now at how attractive and safe the reconstructed farmstead is, thanks to Highline's expertise and the support of the Swedish Colonial Society and our other grantors. In 1988, Gunnar Zetterquist realized his vision of a quote of a Swedish farm from the 1600s, unquote, as Amandus Johnson expressed it in his essay. In 2020, we saved Zetterquist's buildings from demolition and reconstructed them anew on the site Johnson hoped to see, quote, developed as a kind of Skansen, unquote. By preserving the farmstead, the Swedish Colonial Society has made it possible to perform in collaboration with its partners in Tinicum its stated mission of promoting the history and culture of New Sweden in America. May that work prosper. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joe. And thank you everyone for listening to this presentation of the 2020 New Sweden History Conference. I just want to remind everyone to please join the speakers Q&A panel live on October 31st, Saturday at 1 p.m. And if you have any questions for Joe or any of the other speakers, you can email them in advance to nshc@americanswedish.org. So hope to see you soon on October 31st.